Before we begin tonight's story, I want you to imagine this a quiet evening. A man who has spent years putting his life back together piece by piece, and a simple blind date he agreed to only because his little girl whispered, "Maybe it's time, Daddy." He expected an ordinary dinner, a polite conversation, maybe even an awkward goodbye. But what happened that night set off a chain of events no one in that restaurant could have predicted, a moment so unexpectedly human that it would ripple far beyond the table where two strangers first sat down. Tonight, we're not just telling a love story. We're sharing a story about dignity, kindness, and the quiet strength it takes to show who we really are when the world isn't watching. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let's begin. They set up a single dad, as a joke, on a blind date with a deaf girl. His response, silenced everyone. The break room was alive with the kind of noises people stopped noticing after working in the same building for years. The soft whir of the old coffee machine struggling to heat another pot, the uneven tapping of keyboards drifting from the hallway, and that sharp metallic ping of new emails landing in inboxes like tiny alarms. For Derek Miller, every ping felt personal today. He paced in tight circles around the break room table, gripping his phone as if it were evidence in a crime. Greg and Tim sat nearby pretending to eat lunch, but mostly watching Derek unravel. "There it is again," Derek hissed, refreshing the email thread for the 6th time in 1 minute. CFO's considering him. Him. For head therapist. Are you kidding me? Greg raised an eyebrow. "Grant, he's only been here, 13 months, a year and a handful of days," Tim muttered. Derek slammed his palm lightly on the counter. "Exactly. A nobody who walked in with that soft smile and 'How are you doing today?' voice. The single dad sob story. The whole patient whisperer thing. And now everyone worships him." Tim exhaled through his nose. "He's nice." "That's the problem," Derek snapped. "He's nice. All the time. He's like a walking Hallmark movie. Nobody is that kind without an angle." Greg frowned. "Look, he helps people. That's literally his job. And we're good at our jobs, too," Derek shot back. "But we don't get surprise promotions because we folded origami cranes for a client's kid or spent lunch breaks fixing the vending machine for the janitor. He's performing. You both know it." Greg and Tim exchanged a glance. They had started this conversation mildly annoyed. But Derek's resentment had a way of spilling over, latching onto old insecurities until suddenly it felt shared. Derek lowered his voice, leaning in. "What if we prove it?" Tim blinked. "Prove what? That he's not who everyone thinks he is." Derek grinned, and it wasn't kind. "That if you put him in the right situation, he'll crack." Greg shook his head slowly. "Derek, man, this is getting weird. Not weird. Just a little test." Derek's voice softened like he was presenting a harmless magic trick. A blind date. Tim squinted. "With who? A woman I found through a community board. She's deaf." Derek shrugged. "Now before you look at me like that, listen, we don't tell him. We just watch how he reacts. No cruelty, just truth." He tapped his phone meaningfully. "Set up some cameras. If he gets uncomfortable, frustrated, rude, CFO will know the real Grant Holloway." Greg swallowed. "Feels risky." "Feels necessary," Derek corrected. "They want to promote him. Fine. But not based on some fantasy version of him." Silence took over the break room. The coffee machine let out a tired sputter. Someone in the hallway coughed. Greg rubbed his forehead. "And if he doesn't crack, he will." Derek smirked. Everyone does. Far across town, in a small, warm apartment with drawings taped to the fridge and mismatched socks on the carpet, Ruby Holloway spun in circles with her shoelaces untied. "Daddy, Daddy, is this a real date?" Her little voice was bright and breathless. Grant stood near the mirror, buttoning a shirt he hadn't worn in years. The fabric felt stiff, unfamiliar. He tugged at the collar, trying to decide if it made him look more awake or more lost. "It's just dinner," he said softly. But with a lady Ruby pointed out, hopping closer. Is she nice? Do you think she'll like you? Do you like her already? What if she doesn't like pizza? Everyone should like pizza." Grant chuckled under his breath. "Slow down, Bug." Ruby stopped spinning and grew strangely still. "Will she take you away from me?" The question struck harder than she knew. 4 years without his wife had carved a quiet, constant ache into Grant's chest, one he hid behind kindness, patience, and the endless rhythm of being both mother and father. He had learned to measure his life by lunches, packed bedtime stories told, and small victories like remembering to buy toilet paper. He kneeled, smoothing Ruby's hair. "No one takes me away from you," he whispered. Ruby looked unconvinced but accepted the answer with a slow nod. Then I hope she's good. For you." Grant hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready. He wasn't sure his heart was something he was allowed to rebuild, but he also knew loneliness had become a quiet room he'd lived in for too long. He kissed Ruby's forehead, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the evening. Riverside Grill came alive with a soft clatter of dishes and low conversations drifting like gentle currents. Outside, its neon sign hummed in the cool air. Derek arrived first, followed by Greg and Tim. They sat in the corner with jittery energy, setting up a phone angled just right, hiding it behind a small decorative plant. "You sure about this?" Tim whispered. "Relax," Derek muttered. "Tonight, we see who he really is." Through the restaurant window, they spotted Grant approaching, hands in pockets, steps measured almost reluctant. He paused at the door, breathing in once, collecting himself, and then he pushed the door open. A bell chimed softly above him. He stepped inside. Derek leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Game on. Across the room, a new silhouette appeared under the warm glow of the entrance. A woman with long blonde hair paused, adjusting the strap of her purse. Her posture held a hint of nervousness, shoulders tight, chin slightly dipped as if she were bracing for something she couldn't name. Only her outline was visible. Only the tension around her. Only the mystery of her arrival. Grant noticed her too, just as the manager greeted her quietly. And then everything slowed. Derek whispered, almost breathless, "Looks like that's her." The woman stepped further into the light. The evening shifted. The test had begun. Grant's breath caught as the woman Lena finally looked up, but her full face remained hidden from his view. Something in the air told him tonight would change more than he'd planned for. Hours before she stepped into Riverside Grill, Lena Whitmore stood alone in her small apartment, surrounded by the gentle hum of evening, the faint rattle of the old fridge, the soft whoosh of cars passing outside her window, and her own breathing steady but too shallow. She smoothed her hands down the fabric of a simple navy dress, trying to quiet the familiar flutter in her chest. Blind dates were never easy, but for her they carried an additional weight, one built from experience, from disappointment, from the quiet ache of being misunderstood more times than she could count. Her phone lit up with a message from her mother. "Be careful tonight, honey. Not everyone knows how to love someone who can't hear them." Lena closed her eyes. She didn't need sound to feel the truth in those words. Her mother meant well, but they both knew how many evenings had ended in that same sinking feeling, the polite smile fading, the awkward throat clearing that flicker in a stranger's eyes when they realized conversation with her required effort. 17 blind dates in 3 years. 17 variations of the same story. She reached for her purse, steadying her breath. One more. Just give it one more try. She'd promised herself this morning. If it failed, she would finally stop trying. She locked her apartment door behind her. Silence walked with her as it always did. Riverside Grill's interior glowed with soft, warm noise. Conversations buzzed like distant currents. The clatter of plates echoed faintly. None of it touched Lena's world, but she felt it in the air the way a person feels weather shifting. She approached the hostess stand, watching the young woman's lips carefully. "Reservation for Grant," the hostess said. Lena nodded and answered with practiced clarity, shaping each word with care, her voice carrying that gentle, slightly rounded cadence that came from speaking without hearing herself. "Yes, thank you." Across the restaurant, Derek nudged Greg hard enough to rattle the silverware. "Here we go," he whispered. "He has no idea she's deaf." Tim swallowed, eyes fixed on the approaching scene. Grant had risen the moment he spotted her, and though she didn't hear the chair scrape softly against the floor, she noticed the tentative way he straightened his shirt, the way his chest lifted as he took a breath. When their eyes met, Lena braced herself automatically, shoulders tightening, chin pulling back the slightest bit. That tiny defensive reflex. Years of habit. She hated that it lived inside her. She hated that she needed it. But then something unexpected happened. Grant didn't flinch. He didn't freeze. He didn't look around, searching for someone to help him navigate the uncomfortable surprise. He smiled, gentle, warm, and without pity. She approached the table. "Hi." "You must be Grant," she said, reading from his lips and offering a shy smile. Grant nodded, but instead of answering immediately, he lifted his hands and began to sign. "I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for meeting me." He spoke too quietly for the sake of anyone listening, but the message lived in the language of his hands. A full second passed, then another. The restaurant didn't actually fall silent, but it felt like it did. Greg froze his mouth half open. Tim whispered, He knows sign language." Even Derek stiffened, the confidence draining from his face. But all Grant saw was the way Lena's eyes widened, then shimmered. Not theatrically, not dramatically, just softly, deeply, like someone who'd been walking through a long, lonely hallway and suddenly found a door open. Her lips parted. You sign." Grant nodded, his expression steady but quietly emotional. He signed again, slower and clearer this time. "It's my first language." Now it was Lena who had to steady herself. Her hands trembled before she could stop them. She sank into her chair, still processing, still trying to understand how the night had shifted so drastically in less than 10 seconds. Most people didn't even know the difference between ASL and English signing. Most people didn't try. But this man, this stranger, signed like he lived in the language. As Grant sat, he watched her carefully, not with scrutiny, but with genuine attention. He let the moment breathe. Let her breathe. Say something her mind urged. Move. Smile. Do anything. But her throat felt tight with emotions she hadn't expected to feel tonight. Finally, she managed a shaky breath and signed back, "I didn't know you were fluent." Grant smiled again, smaller this time, almost shy. "My mom taught me," he said aloud, while signing the same words. "She was a teacher at a school for the deaf. I grew up around ASL." Lena stared at him, stunned, not just by the words, but by the ease with which he translated both worlds. He wasn't performing. He wasn't over-enunciating or speaking to her like she was fragile. He wasn't staring at her lips instead of her eyes. He was simply present. A warmth spread in her chest, slow and confusing. Derek watched with growing dread. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Derek? Maybe we shouldn't." "No." Derek snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. His confidence was slipping like sand through an open hand. Tim didn't speak at all. He just watched Grant and Lena fall into a rhythm that should have taken weeks, not minutes. Back at the table, Lena finally found her footing again. Her hands moved more steadily. "I didn't expect this," she signed. Grant nodded, understanding more than she said. "I know blind dates can be complicated." He paused, then signed a gentle question. "Are you comfortable? We can slow down." Lena let out a quiet, trembling laugh, more breath than sound. "Yes," she signed. "I'm comfortable. Just surprised." Grant nodded again, and something unspoken passed between them, a sense that they were standing at the edge of something neither had anticipated. He gestured toward the menu and signed lightly, "Shall we start?" Lena nodded, still blinking back the memory of that first stunning moment. She hadn't planned to hope tonight. She hadn't planned to feel anything. Yet here she was feeling everything. Across the restaurant, Derek's jaw tightened as he hissed under his breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. His hand hovered over the phone recording them because for the first time he wasn't sure he wanted to see what Grant would do next. For a long moment, neither of them reached for the menus. Lena's fingers rested lightly on the table, still warm from the surprise of their first exchange. Grant waited, giving her time to settle his breathing, steady his posture open. He didn't rush. He didn't fill the space with nervous chatter. He simply stayed anchored, attentive. The restaurant buzzed softly around them, but between them the world felt quieter. Not empty, just gentler. Finally, Lena exhaled and signed, "Okay, we can try ordering now." Grant nodded, picking up his menu and signing along with his spoken words. "They have salmon, pasta, steak, anything. Look good to you." She watched his hands as much as his lips. His signing had weight fluency shaped by years, not a quick YouTube tutorial. The way his hands moved carried the kind of confidence that came from living inside the language, not borrowing it for a single night. Lena pointed to a dish on the menu. "Salmon," she said aloud, then corrected herself with a small shrug and signed the word, more clearly, salmon. Grant smiled, returning the sign back to her, matching her rhythm. When the waiter came, he ordered for both of them, speaking clearly, not loudly, making sure Lena could follow the conversation by watching his face. She appreciated that more than she could say. When the waiter left, Grant leaned back slightly, hands resting in his lap. Then he began signing again, his movements smooth and instinctive. "My mom taught me. She was a teacher at a school for the deaf." Lena felt the edges of her heart shift. "Your first language?" she asked. Grant nodded. "Yeah. English came after. My mom wanted me to understand her world before I tried to live in my own." His voice softened as he signed the same thought. She believed language is a kind of love. Lena looked at him a long moment, swallowing down a strange warm ache. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "You would have," Grant said. She was patient, fiercely patient, and she made this. He imitated her earlier sign for salmon with a grin, look easy even when it wasn't. Lena laughed under her breath. Not loud, just a quiet release of tension. The first real laugh she'd had on a date in a long time. She lifted her hands slowly, signing, "You're very good. Better than most hearing people I've met." Grant shook his head. "I'm rusty. Haven't had anyone to practice with in a while." Why, she asked before thinking. The answer settled over him like a shadow. "My mom passed 3 years ago. Stroke. Sudden." He paused, letting his hands fall still. His voice dropped lower, rich with memory. She used to sign every morning at breakfast, just small things. Weather, plans for the day. Even when she cooked, her hands were always talking. He gave a soft grin. She said silence wasn't the absence of sound, just the presence of understanding. Lena blinked rapidly, a thin sheen of emotion gathering in her eyes. She signed, slow, meaningful. "She sounds like she understood the world deeply." Grant nodded. She did. The plates arrived, and for a moment the clink of silverware filled the air. Lena's movements grew more comfortable. She lifted her fork, cutting into her meal with steady hands. She glanced at Grant's lips as he spoke, but he continued signing alongside his words, giving her 2 different channels to follow. It felt respectful. It felt safe. After a few bites, she signed 17 blind dates. She paused, eyes flickering to see if he understood. Then she clarified, "I almost stopped trying." Grant set down his fork carefully. "Bad experiences." Lena's expression tightened, not in anger, but in memory. Her hands moved more slowly now. "People leave when they realize conversations take effort. Some stay, but make me feel like charity." She hesitated. The worst was a college party. Friends invited me. Later, I learned they filmed me laughing at the deaf girl at a loud party. They posted it everywhere. Grant's chest tightened, a flicker of protective anger rising inside him. He forced his voice to remain even. "People can be cruel," he said quietly. "Yes," she signed. "And predictable." But then her gaze softened. "Tonight does not feel like those other nights." Grant smiled gently. "Good. It shouldn't." Across the room, Derek shifted in his seat, sweating through his shirt. Greg and Tim had stopped whispering altogether. They didn't know sign language, but they understood enough to see connection forming where they had expected discomfort. Tim finally said what all three were thinking. "We messed up." Derek shook his head sharply, as if denying the obvious could turn back time, but nothing could stop what was unfolding at that table. Later, after plates had been cleared and a shared dessert picked apart, Lena excused herself to the restroom. Grant watched her walk away, the soft sway of her hair disappearing around the corner. He breathed in deeply. And then, something strange pricked at the back of his neck. He glanced around casually and saw it. A phone hidden behind a small potted plant. Camera lens pointed directly at their table, red recording light glowing faintly. His heart dropped. He looked past the plant and saw Derek quickly avert his eyes. The realization hit hard, cold, sharp, humiliating. His co-workers, a trap, a test, using Lena, not just him, as a prop in some twisted experiment. The anger came fast, but beneath it, deeper, sharper, a second emotion surged. Fear, not for himself, for her. He imagined the look on Lena's face, the way her shoulders might fold inward, the silence within her, deepening into something heavy and familiar. He couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not to her. He closed his eyes briefly and whispered inside his own mind, "Don't ruin her night. She doesn't deserve that. She doesn't deserve to be pulled into their cruelty." When Lena returned, Grant had already steadied himself. He lifted his water hands, trembling just slightly, and smiled at her as if nothing were wrong. Protecting her felt more urgent than protecting his own pride, but inside his chest, a storm was gathering. As he walked her outside into the cool night air, Grant knew he had to make a choice: expose the truth and risk breaking her trust, or stay silent and let her walk into another lie. The weight of that decision pressed on him with every breath. The night air outside Riverside Grill carried a soft chill, the kind that brushed lightly across skin and made every breath feel a little sharper. Cars rolled by in the distance, their engines humming low, blending into the quiet rhythm of the river behind the restaurant. A faint breeze tugged gently at Lena's hair as she stepped through the door, tightening her coat with one hand. Grant followed her out, the weight of what he'd discovered pressing against his ribs like a stone he couldn't swallow. He hadn't rehearsed this moment. There was no right version of it. Only the truth, heavy, raw, and unavoidable. For a few seconds they simply walked side by side, their footsteps soft on the pavement. Lena looked calm, almost peaceful in the dim glow of the street lamp. But Grant's mind churned beneath the surface like a storm waiting to break. "You have to tell her," a quiet voice inside him urged. "If you stay silent, she'll be walking into another lie, another trap, another moment that will replay in her mind for years." He couldn't be another scar she carried. He stopped walking. "Lena," he said gently. She turned toward him, watching his lips with that attentive focus he'd already grown to admire. He lifted his hands so she could follow both channels, spoken and signed. "I need to tell you something," he said softly, signing each word with care, "and it's going to hurt. I'm sorry." Her shoulders stiffened ever so slightly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't back away. She simply held her breath. Grant swallowed hard. "Tonight," he began. "It wasn't an accident. Or at least, not all of it." Lena's eyes narrowed with confusion. He continued, hands trembling subtly as he signed, "My co-workers. Derek, Greg, Tim. They set this up. They didn't tell me. Or you. the truth. The shift in her expression was immediate. Confusion dissolved into something colder recognition. Recognition of a story she'd lived too many times. Grant pushed through the ache tightening his throat. They knew you were deaf. They didn't tell me. They hid a camera. They wanted to test me, to see if I'd react badly, to use your disability as bait. Lena's face drained of color. Her breathing hitched shallow. She blinked once, slow, stunned, before lifting her hands, her signing sharp and trembling. Am I always going to be someone's lesson, someone's test, someone's content? She wasn't shouting. She didn't need volume to carve pain into the air. Images flashed through her mind, hands holding phones at parties, people whispering behind her back, laughter she couldn't hear but could feel, in the way bodies shook, in the way eyes cut sideways. 17 blind dates. 17 disappointments. And now this. Grant's heart clenched. He didn't move closer. He didn't try to touch her. He knew instinctively she needed space room to breathe, room to hurt. I didn't know, he said, voice rough. I swear to you. But once I did, I couldn't lie to you. You deserve better. You deserved a real night. A real chance. Her hands dropped limply to her sides. So this wasn't real, she signed numbly. Just another trap. No. Grant stepped forward, fighting the urge to reach for her. No, Lena. For me, tonight was real. Every moment with you was real. But she couldn't hear sincerity as sound. She had to see it. And right now, hurt blurred everything she saw. She backed away a single step, then another. I need time. She whispered aloud, the words fragmented, fragile. She signed them too slower, as if her hands carried extra weight. I need time. Grant nodded, even though the motion felt like tearing something inside him. I understand, he said softly. She turned and walked away, her footsteps small, steady, determined not to crumble. But Grant could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath shuddered as she wrapped her arms around herself for warmth. He watched until she disappeared around the corner. The cold night pressed in on him, filling the silence she left behind. When Grant got home, the apartment was dim, except for the warm sliver of light leaking from Ruby's bedroom. She must have stayed awake, waiting for him the way she always did when he tried something new or scary. Her door opened with a soft creak, and Ruby appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, curls messy from sleep. Daddy, she murmured. How was it? Is she nice? Grant sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, exhaustion washing through him. He looked up at Ruby, his anchor, his compass, and forced a faint smile. She's... He exhaled slowly. She's special, Bug. Really special. Ruby patted over and leaned into his side, pressing her cheek against his arm. But you're sad, she whispered. Did she not like you? Grant shook his head gently. I'm sad because someone hurt her, and I was there when it happened. Ruby frowned, thinking hard, the way only a child could, simple, direct, honest. You always tell me we have to be brave and fix what we can, she said softly. So, can you fix this? Grant closed his eyes. Her words, small as they were, hit him with surprising force. Bravery wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was choosing to show up where you'd failed before. He lifted Ruby into his arms, holding her tight. I'll try, he whispered. I don't know how yet, but I'll try. Ruby nodded into his shoulder, accepting the promise. He set her back in bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. Back in the living room, his phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown account. He frowned and opened it. A short video. Of him and Lena. From a different angle. Not Derek's phone. Not the hidden camera. But someone else's. Someone who had seen something beautiful and shared it. The caption read, In a loud world, this man chose to speak her language. Grant stared at the screen as the room filled with the quiet glow of the video, Lena's shy smile, his signing hands, the stillness between them. Something had begun tonight. Something Derek couldn't control. Something he didn't understand. and Grant knew whatever came next, he had to face it. As he watched the video loop again, the faint hum of his phone filled the silence, and suddenly notification after notification began flooding in. Something was happening. Something big. The night wasn't done with him yet. The next morning arrived not with sunlight, but with noise. Grant woke to the sound of his phone vibrating against the nightstand, short, sharp pulses that came one after another like a heartbeat that had lost control. His head pounded from too little sleep and too many thoughts, but the notifications kept coming. Ping, ping, ping. He blinked blearily at the screen. 42 new messages, 18 missed calls, 129 notifications. His stomach tightened. He opened the first one. It wasn't from Derek. Not Greg, not Tim. It was a link, a video, and the thumbnail froze his breath. Him. Lena. Signing across a silent table. The caption read, "In a loud world, this man chose to speak her language." Grant sat up, heart thumping hard now. He tapped the video. It began with a warm, low hum of restaurant noise. Glasses clinking, chairs shifting, conversations like muted waves. Then the young couple who filmed it whispered, "Oh my gosh, look at them. He's signing." Their phones shifted slightly, focusing on the moment Grant smiled and signed, "I'm really glad you're here." The restaurant in the video grew quiet, visibly palpably as heads turned. Lena's face softened with surprise, awe, and something achingly vulnerable. And then the camera zoomed in, capturing her whispered, "You sign," and his answer signed with smooth, practiced hands, "It's my first language." The video ended there right at the moment. Everything changed. Grant let out a slow exhale, rubbing his forehead. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared for anything that came after last night. A soft shuffle sounded beside him. Ruby stood in the doorway, hair wild, holding her stuffed llama by one leg. "Daddy," she asked, voice thick with sleep, "why is your phone yelling so much?" Grant pulled her into his lap, kissing the top of her head. Something unexpected happened. Ruby blinked at the screen. "Is that you and Lena?" He nodded. "Did you fix it?" she asked quietly. Grant's chest tightened. "I don't know yet, bug." Ruby studied the video a moment longer. "She looks nice," she murmured, "like someone who would laugh at my volcano jokes." Grant smiled weakly. She would. He wasn't sure what else to say. At the same moment, across the city, 3 other phones buzzed violently on a cluttered desk in the office break room. Derek snatched his up first. What the Greg froze mid-sip of his coffee. Tim nearly choked on a granola bar. There it was, their plan, their setup, but filmed from another table from people who had witnessed something pure instead of something cruel. Derek's face drained of color as he watched Grant sign with easy tenderness, watched Lena glow under the attention, watched the whole restaurant sense something real. "This isn't ours," Greg whispered. "No kidding," Tim murmured. Derek scrolled through the comments on the video, comment after comment flooding in. "My daughter is deaf. This made me cry. This is what kindness looks like. Protect that woman at all costs. Men like him restore my faith in humanity." Derek's throat tightened. This wasn't the footage he wanted the world to see. This wasn't the story he wanted to tell. And now, he wasn't in control. Meanwhile, in a quiet apartment on the west side of the city, Lena woke to a cascade of alerts lighting up her phone like fireworks. She squinted at the screen, confused. Her best friend from the deaf community had sent one message. "Look. Isn't this your date?" Below was the video link. Lena's heart hammered as she watched the moment replay Grant signing across the table, leaning in gently so she could see his face, the wonder in her own eyes. She touched her lips lightly. She hadn't imagined it. That warmth was real. That moment had been real. And yet, it was now out in the world. Her world. A world that hadn't always been kind to her. As she watched the video a second time, emotions tangled inside her. Awe, fear, hope, memory, longing and that deep ache of knowing last night had ended not in magic, but in hurt. She set the phone down, blinking rapidly. Her chest ached. Why does joy always come with a shadow attached? She didn't have an answer. Back in Grant's apartment, Ruby had wandered back to her room to get dressed, leaving Grant alone in the half-lit quiet. He stared at the video again, hands clasped loosely between his knees, elbows resting on them. A knot formed in his throat. The comments flooding in weren't about him, not really. They were about what people desperately wanted to believe still existed in the world. And yet, all he could think about was Lena's face when he told her the truth. The way she stepped back. The way she folded into herself. He hated how familiar that expression was. Hated knowing he'd been part of another wound in her long history of disappointments. He needed to fix this. Not for the internet. Not for his reputation. But because the woman in that video deserved better than what she'd been given last night. Ruby patted back in, tugging at his sleeve. "Are you going to say sorry to her?" she asked. "Yes," he whispered. She frowned. "But not just words." "Right." Grant's breath caught. She'd echoed something he'd taught her, something he lived by. "No," he said softly, "not just words." Ruby hugged him, little arms squeezing tight around his chest. "Then you can fix it," she said with absolute childhood certainty. When she let go, she marched toward the kitchen to find cereal mission accomplished. Grant stood slowly. His decision settled like a weight and a promise both. He had to face Derek, face the office, face what they did. But more importantly, he had to face Lena again with honesty, humility, and no expectations. By the time he arrived at work, whispers followed him like a trail. Phones lit up as he passed. He wasn't sure how many people had seen the video, but it felt like everyone. He didn't hide, didn't shy away, didn't look down. He had a purpose now, a clarity. He would confront the people who set the trap. Then he would try carefully, respectfully to rebuild the bridge they'd tried to destroy between him and Lena. Because some things mattered more than embarrassment, more than fear. Some things were worth fighting for. As the elevator doors slid open, Grant stepped onto his office floor only to find Derek, Greg, and Tim already waiting for him, pale-faced and shaken. The tension between them crackled like a live wire. Something was about to break. The office felt uncomfortably loud that morning, not because people were talking, but because they weren't. The quiet was sharp, filled with soft gasps, hurried footsteps, muffled whispers. Every time Grant walked past a cubicle, heads ducked or phones tilted away as if everyone had seen something they weren't ready to acknowledge. He stepped out of the elevator, the air colder than usual, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. And there they were. Derek, Greg, Tim. Huddled together near the break room door, pale and jittery. The same spot where the plan had been born, where envy, insecurity, and cruelty had found a home. Grant didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't let anger dictate his steps. He simply walked toward them, each footstep, steady, controlled. The way a man walks when he has made a decision he cannot undo. The three of them stiffened. Greg started sounding breathless. Grant lifted a hand, stopping him gently. "I'm not here to shout," he said, "or insult you, or humiliate you the way you humiliated Lena." The word Lena made Tim's eyes drop instantly. Grant took a slow breath. "I just want you to hear what you actually did." He stepped closer, close enough that they couldn't avoid seeing the hurt in his eyes, but close enough that he couldn't avoid seeing the regret in theirs. "You set me up," he said softly, deliberately. "You lied. You manipulated a woman's disability to try to expose something ugly in me." He signed as he spoke, slow, clear, purposeful, because saying it wasn't enough. He wanted them to see it. "That doesn't say anything about me," he continued. "It says everything about you." Derek swallowed hard, jaw tightening, but he didn't speak. Greg's mouth trembled. "We didn't think it'd get this far. We didn't think it would go viral. Grant finished for him. Make people emotional. Move them. He shook his head. You didn't think about the impact at all. Tim rubbed the back of his neck, voice cracking. We just thought you were performing, and we wanted to show it. Grant exhaled a breath that felt like it had been trapped for days. Performing, he repeated. Kindness isn't a performance. Empathy isn't a prop. And people, his voice dipped lower. People aren't tests. Derek finally spoke, his voice raw. You don't get it. You walk in every day with that easy smile. People like you. You get the good cases. You get noticed. And then we hear CFO is considering you for head therapist. You've been here 13 months, man. 13 months. Grant blinked, taken aback not by the jealousy but by the naked honesty in Derek's tone. I've worked here 10 years, Derek continued, voice shaking with a mixture of resentment and shame. No promotions, no recognition. I show up, do the work, go home. And suddenly you show up with your widower story, your kid, your perfect therapist angle, and everyone thinks you're some kind of savior. Grant stared at him, sympathy and disappointment blending into something complicated. I'm not perfect, Grant said quietly. And he meant it, deeply. I burn dinner. I forget picture day. I lose my keys weekly. I'm tired. All the time. He paused, letting the words settle. But I don't use people as props. Silence settled over all four of them, heavy as wet sand. Finally, Greg whispered, We messed up. Bad. Before Grant could respond, a voice cut through the hallway, Gentleman. The CFO stood at the end of the corridor, her expression unreadable, her heels clicking softly as she approached. Behind her, an HR rep followed with a folder tucked under her arm. Conference room. Now. The meeting was quiet at first, too quiet. The only sound was the soft shuffle of papers as HR laid out copies of the video, the emails between the three men, and a formal statement from the couple who filmed the viral clip. Then the CFO spoke. What you three did, she said, voice calm but edged with steel-violated company ethics, psychological safety protocols, and basic human decency. Tim winced. Greg bowed his head. Derek's jaw clenched. But she continued, what concerns me most is this. She held up a printed message, an email from a mother. It read, If my deaf son ever meets a man like the one in that video, I hope he doesn't have co-workers like these three. The words hung in the air. Derek flinched. Hard. HR laid out the consequences, mandatory ethics training, written warnings on their records, community service recommendations, removal from client-facing roles for a probationary period. But the CFO leaned forward, her gaze sharp. Punishment is one thing, she said. What you do with the weight of your choices is another. Her eyes flicked toward Grant. I suggest you think very carefully about the damage you've caused. Not to Grant, but to the woman you used. The room fell silent again. A silence that felt colder, more cutting than any raised voice. When the meeting ended, Derek stepped out into the hallway, breathing as though he'd been underwater for hours. His hands shook. He looked down at his phone screen, at the video still paused at the moment Grant signed, It's my first language. His eyes softened in a way Grant had never seen. What have we become? He whispered. Greg and Tim stood beside him, equally shaken, equally changed. They exchanged a look, three men who thought they were playing a harmless prank, now forced to face the mirror. Derek inhaled shakily. If we apologize, he murmured, it can't just be words. Greg nodded slowly. Tim closed his eyes and exhaled. Something had cracked in all three of them, not broken, not beyond repair, just cracked enough for light to enter. As they walked away, the three men shared one silent, heavy thought. If they ever wanted forgiveness, they'd have to learn how to speak it in her language. The sound in the small community center classroom was unlike anything Derek, Greg, or Tim had ever heard. Not noise, not chatter, just the soft scrape of chairs, the rustle of notebooks, and the gentle tapping of hands shaping unfamiliar movements in the air. The kind of silence that demanded humility. The kind of silence that exposed you. A middle-aged ASL instructor named Marla stood at the front of the room, her bracelets clicking softly each time she moved her hands. Her voice was warm but firm, guiding a dozen adult learners through the beginning steps of a language none of them were used to speaking with their bodies. Derek sat hunched in the front row, shoulders, tight jaw clenched. Greg sat beside him, sweating through his shirt. Tim, usually unbothered by anything, now looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin. They weren't used to being the slowest people in the room. They weren't used to fumbling. But there was no shortcut here. Marla walked past their row, pausing as she watched them clumsily attempt the sign for sorry, a slow circle over the heart. "No," Marla said, shaking her head gently. She demonstrated again, her movements smoother, more intentional. "It's not about perfection. It's about meaning. Your hands can lie, but your eyes can't." Derek dropped his gaze immediately. Marla softened. "Good. That means this matters to you." Greg swallowed hard. Tim nodded, embarrassed. They practiced again, and again, and again. Hands shaking, egos dissolving, something shifting in them quietly but surely. By the end of class, their wrists ached and their pride felt scraped raw, but something inside each of them had cracked open enough for sincerity to finally seep in. Across the city, in a quiet cafe that smelled faintly of cinnamon and warm milk, Lena wiped down a table with slow, methodical movements. She worked 3 shifts a week here, partly for income, partly because she genuinely liked the routine. The cafe was calm today. Small bursts of sound vibrated weakly through the floor, customers chatting cups, clinking a coffee grinder pulsing, but nothing reached her fully. She sensed the noise, felt its presence in the air, but lived in her own pocket of silence. Her mind felt full, though, full of Grant, of the video, of his confession, of the bruise last night had left behind. She hadn't replied to his message yet. Part of her wanted to. Part of her felt she couldn't trust herself. She placed the cloth down just as the door opened. 3 men stepped inside. Her breath stalled. Derek, Greg, Tim. No hidden cameras, no smirks, no bitter jealousy wrapped in false politeness. Just 3 men who looked like they'd aged 10 years in one night. They approached slowly, hands visible, palms open as if entering sacred territory. Lena stiffened. Her first instinct was to walk away. Her second was to protect herself. But she stayed still. Derek cleared his throat lightly, then lifted his hands. The sign was clumsy, uneven, slightly crooked, but unmistakable. Sorry. He pressed his fist gently over his heart in the slow, circular motion Marla had drilled into them. Greg and Tim followed, not in sync, but in sincerity. Then Derek signed again, piecing together phrases they had practiced for hours. We were wrong. No excuse. We were cruel. His breathing hitched on the last sign, and he looked away ashamed. Greg stepped forward next. He didn't try to speak. He didn't try to hide. He just signed slowly. We want to be better. Not for us. For the people we hurt. Tim, usually the quiet one, signed something simple but surprisingly steady. You didn't deserve that. For a long moment, Lena didn't move. Not a blink, not a breath. Just stillness. She watched their hands, their trembling fingers, their lowered eyes. And suddenly something inside her softened, not forgiveness, not absolution, but recognition. This wasn't a performance. They weren't asking for absolution. They weren't begging to erase what they'd done. They were admitting in the most vulnerable way possible that they had broken something, and they were trying to understand how to fix it. Slowly, she lifted her own hands. What you did, she signed each movement sharp and clear, doesn't disappear because you feel bad. Derek nodded, jaw tight, accepting the blow, but choosing to learn my language to say, sorry. Her hands slowed, her posture gentled. That matters. Relief washed over their faces. Not joy, not celebration, just the quiet release of three men who had braced themselves for rejection and found a small fragile opening instead. "Thank you," Greg whispered, his voice cracking. Lena shook her head. "Not forgiveness." She said aloud the words soft but firm. Then she signed it to make sure they understood. "Not forgiveness, but a beginning." They nodded, grateful for even that. The three men turned to leave, and Lena let them go, not with anger but with a strange calm in her chest. Just as the door swung closed behind them, her phone buzzed. A message. From Grant. "If you're willing, I'd like to see you again. No tests, no cameras, just us." Her breath caught. Her thumb hovered above the screen. This wasn't a simple choice. It wasn't just about last night. It was about every night before it, every wound, every disappointment, every time she'd been treated like a spectacle instead of a person. She stared at Grant's message a long moment, her heartbeat a slow, trembling rhythm inside her chest. Then, click. A soft, almost silent sound filled the quiet cafe as she pressed yes. The decision was small in sound, but enormous in meaning. Lena locked her phone and sat very still, palms pressed against the cool wooden table. She had said yes, but now her pulse raced with a single lingering question. What would their second meeting bring? Healing or heartbreak? Saturday afternoon settled gently over Grant's neighborhood, soft footsteps of joggers on the sidewalk, distant laughter from children riding bikes, and the slow, comforting hum of weekend life. Inside the Holloway home, the atmosphere was warm, with simple sounds, the light clatter of Ruby arranging her books, the whisper of her pencil scratching across paper as she doodled tiny volcanoes on sticky notes, and the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock. Grant checked the oven one last time, not because he doubted the cookies, but because nervous energy made stillness impossible. He wiped his palms on a dish towel and told himself to breathe slow and steady. This wasn't a date. Not really. It was a beginning. A second chance offered by a woman who had every reason not to give one. He heard a gentle knock at the door. Ruby froze mid-step, eyes widening with the scrambled excitement of a child who knows something important is happening. She darted to the door and looked at her dad for permission. Grant nodded. Ruby unlocked it with careful fingers, pulling it open with both hands. Lena stood there, framed by soft afternoon light. Her hair was pinned loosely behind her ears, making it easier for her to see faces. She wore a simple sweater, sleeves tugged nervously at the wrists, but her eyes, steady, questioning, hopeful, held the kind of strength born from surviving too many bruised evenings. Ruby's hands flew up immediately, signing a little too fast. "Hello. Nice to meet you. I'm Ruby." Her signs were clumsy, her movements big and enthusiastic, but unmistakably earnest. Lena's lips parted in surprise and then softened into a smile that reached her eyes. She lowered herself to Ruby's level cardigan, brushing the floor, and signed gently, "Hi, Ruby. I've heard you're an expert on volcanoes." Ruby gasped audibly, then grabbed Lena's hand with the pure, unfiltered confidence only children possessed. "I know everything." Wannasie Grant watched from the doorway, a quiet exhale escaping him. A part of him had been terrified about this moment, not because he doubted Lena, but because he'd spent 4 years building a world that revolved around his daughter's safety. And now here was a woman who didn't just enter that world she knelt beside, it saw it, honored it. He stepped back to let Lena in. The house wasn't fancy. The living room carpet was worn soft from years of toys and bedtime stories. The couch sagged slightly in the middle. The walls carried framed drawings and finger paint art Ruby insisted on displaying. But Lena didn't look at any of it like it was lacking. She looked at it like it was home. Ruby tugged her toward the bookshelf filled with science kits and messy binders. She flipped open a blue notebook with a volcano sketch and proudly pointed at each label. Lena listened the way Grant had listened to her, fully, attentively, respectfully. Her eyes stayed on Ruby's face, not the imperfections in the signs. Ruby attempted another sign, lava. It came out wrong, Both hands flailed upward like startled butterflies. Lena laughed not at her but with her and gently, patiently corrected the sign. Ruby tried again. Still wrong. She giggled so hard she fell sideways onto the couch. Grant leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely, heartwarming with each passing second. This soft, unexpected domesticity was something he hadn't let himself imagine. It felt fragile, like touching a bubble and waiting to see if it would pop or hold. Lena eventually walked to the kitchen where Grant was awkwardly pretending to organize the same stack of mail for the 5th time. She tapped the counter to get his attention. When he turned, she signed, "You're home. Feels peaceful." He answered both aloud and with his hands. "It hasn't always, but it tries." That made her smile. He signed again, slower this time. "Thank you. For coming." Lena took a breath, steadying herself. "Thank you. For asking." For a moment, neither moved, letting the quiet settle around them, not empty, not heavy, just honest. The oven beeped gently, breaking the moment. Grant grabbed a mitt and took out the cookies, misshapen but warm. Ruby reappeared, crumbs already on her shirt from some previous snack, and announced, "Daddy burns cookies a lot, but these smell okay." Grant groaned. "Thanks, kid." Lena laughed a soft ripple of sound and signed, "I'd like to try one." They all gathered around the small kitchen table, sharing cookies, small stories, and the kind of laughter that didn't need volume to feel real. Later, as dusk painted faint shadows onto the walls, Grant set up his laptop on the table for a video call with Lena's parents. He was nervous, more nervous than he had been on any first date or job interview. Lena sat beside him, Ruby perched between them. When the screen came to life, her parents' faces appeared concerned, protective, polite. Her mother signed first. "We know what happened. The trap. The recording. The humiliation. We need to know. How do we trust you with her heart?" Grant swallowed and met their gaze straight on. He spoke and signed at the same time, calm, firm, deliberate. "I'm not asking you to trust me today, or tomorrow, or next week." He paused, letting the truth fill the silence. "I'm asking you to watch how I treat her over time, not with gestures, not with grand speeches, but with consistency, with presence, with the understanding that she is not a test, not a lesson, not content." Ruby nudged him. "He's good at that," she whispered loudly. Lena's father cracked the tiniest smile. Her mother nodded slowly. Her signs softened. "We will watch, and we will hope you are the man she thinks you might be." The call ended with gentle goodbyes, but the room stayed warm long after the laptop closed. When Lena left that night, the sky had shifted into a soft navy blue, streetlights buzzing faintly in the distance. She stood on the porch a moment, looking back at the small home behind her. Grant's home. Ruby's home. The place she'd just stepped into not as an outsider, but as someone cautiously welcomed. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted them to sign, "I'm scared, but I want to try." Grant didn't hesitate. "Then we'll try together." Her breath caught. She nodded and walked into the night with a fuller heart than she'd had in years. Alone on the porch, Grant watched her go, unaware that tomorrow would test everything again, his values, his work, and the quiet beginnings of their fragile new bond. Monday dawned with a crisp stillness, the kind that made every sound feel sharper, more deliberate. Grant walked into the office with the calm stride of a man who had made peace with whatever storm waited behind the next door. But he wasn't prepared for what the CFO had planned. He had barely set his bag down when he heard her voice from down the hall. "Grant, do you have a moment?" Her tone was unreadable, too steady, too professional, the kind of tone used before delivering either a promotion or a reprimand. He followed her into the conference room where two members of the PR team sat with laptops open, slides pulled up, and the viral video paused on the screen. His stomach tightened. The CFO gestured for him to sit. "We'd like to talk to you about something important," she said. "Given last week's events, we think you might be the perfect face for our new inclusion initiative." She clicked a slide. Grant saw his own hands frozen mid-sign. Lena's eyes soft. The restaurant bathed in quiet, golden stillness. It looked beautiful, but it wasn't theirs to use. The CFO leaned forward. This video is inspiring people nationwide. Parents with deaf children are writing to us. Therapists across the country are sharing it. This is a real moment for our company, Grant, and we'd like you to represent it. PR nodded enthusiastically. We can film interviews, create training modules, even feature your story in the annual gala. Grant raised a hand. They stopped. He took a breath, slow, controlled, before he spoke. Respectfully. No. The room froze. The CFO blinked. No, Grant nodded. No. He spoke with a gentle firmness, each word measured. This wasn't a marketing moment. It was a mistake. A painful one. And a lot of people got hurt because of it, especially Lena. The PR team exchanged glances. Grant continued, voice warming with conviction. If we turn this into a slogan, we cheapen what really happened. We make a wound look pretty. We celebrate something before we fix anything inside our own walls. The CFO's gaze sharpened. Not offended, curious. Grant leaned forward, hands clasped. We need to address the real issues first. Internal culture, ethics, respect. The way we treat not just clients, but each other. Then, when we've actually done the work, you can talk about values. Silence covered the room like a blanket, thick, heavy, thoughtful. Slowly, the CFO closed her laptop. You know, she said quietly, most people would have leapt at the spotlight. Grant offered a small smile. That's exactly why I shouldn't. A long moment passed before she let out a low breath that sounded almost like a laugh. I see why people trust you, Grant, and I see why the board was right. He frowned. Right about what? She extended her hand. Congratulations, you're officially our new head therapist. Grant blinked, stunned into silence. It's not because of the video, she clarified. It's because of how you handled everything around it. He shook her hand, still absorbing it, as she added, and yes, we'll be implementing the new ethics policies immediately. Grant nodded, relief settling low in his chest. It wasn't the promotion that mattered. It was the fact that something good, something meaningful would grow from something painful. Meanwhile, across town, Lena sat at her kitchen table with a half-eaten sandwich and her laptop open. Her parents had called again, gentler this time, more curious than protective. She told them about the cookies, about Ruby's enthusiastic signing, about Grant's quiet sincerity, about how he never once pushed her to trust him, he simply showed up. Her mother sighed through the screen. We see you softening, she signed. We only hope he earns what you are giving him. Lena didn't argue. She was scared, but she was choosing bravery in small doses. Later that afternoon, she met Grant at a small park halfway between their homes. Children played in the distant swing chains, rattling shoes, thudding lightly against dirt. The sounds were faint impressions for her, but she felt their vibration through the ground. Grant walked toward her, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, humble, hopeful. When he reached her, he signed first, "Thank you for coming." She signed back, "We said we would try." They walked side by side along a path lined with autumn leaves. After a few minutes, she asked, hands slow, cautious, "Did your job fix things or make them worse?" Grant chuckled under his breath. A little of both, but they're listening now. And maybe changing. She nodded thoughtfully. Then she paused, facing him fully, her expression shifting into something more vulnerable. What happens next? With us? Grant inhaled deeply, taking a moment to choose honesty over reassurance. I don't know what life is going to bring, he said, signing as he spoke, but I know the kind of man I want to be in it. He stepped a little closer. And that man doesn't walk away when things get quiet. Something fluttered in her chest, unexpected, tender, warm. Her fingers brushed his hand. Not holding it, not yet, but asking for permission. He offered his hand gently. She took it. It felt right. Soft. Unrushed. As the sun dipped lower, painting everything in amber, Lena looked at him and signed, "I've lived most of my life trying to be safe. Maybe it's time I try being brave instead." Grant's throat tightened. He lifted her hand to his chest, letting her feel the slow, steady beat beneath it. "Then let's be brave together," he signed. She smiled, a real one, the kind that curled softly into her eyes. And then, with a breath that felt like stepping into a new world, she signed, "Let's see where this goes." As they walked back toward the parking lot, fingers intertwined, neither noticed the tiny figure perched on swing set watching them. Ruby, grinning wide, planning something big for the two people she loved most. The seasons turned almost without permission. Weeks folded into months, and months slipped quietly into nearly a year. Life didn't change in dramatic leaps. It softened, deepened, widened around the edges. The small, steady details of ordinary days stitched themselves into something larger, something that felt almost like healing. And Grant Holloway began to live again, not in pieces, not in cautious half-steps, but in full, deliberate breaths. The first sound of most mornings was Ruby's laughter as she practiced ASL in front of the bathroom mirror, her hands smacking into the wrong shapes, her giggles echoing faintly down the hallway. Sometimes she signed Cat and accidentally told Grant she was Angry Soup. Sometimes she tried Volcano and looked like she was chasing away bees. Sometimes she signed Lena with so much dramatic flair that Grant joked she could win an Oscar. But every morning, Ruby tried. And every morning, Lena cheered her on, sometimes in person, sometimes on video call before work, her hands moving patiently, her expressions encouraging. Lena had become a constant, not by force, not by rushing, but by presence. She and Grant moved through their days like two people who had learned slowly and gently to trust the quiet in between words. At Grant's work, things shifted too. Clients now asked for him specifically. Co-workers sought his advice more openly. And, though the viral video had long stopped trending, the impact remained. The new ethics policies rolled out. Mandatory trainings on disability respect were implemented. Anonymous reporting channels strengthened. And Derek Gregg and Tim, by some unspoken agreement, showed up every week at the community center to volunteer in beginning ASL classes. They weren't saviors. They weren't heroes. They were simply men trying to be better than they had been. Sometimes Grant passed by the glass door and saw them with hands stumbling through signs surrounded by laughter from deaf children who delighted in correcting them. It wasn't redemption with confetti and applause. It was redemption in small, steady steps, the way real change often chooses to arrive. Lena's life blossomed too. She started an inclusive writing studio helping nonprofit schools and health centers create deaf-friendly communication materials. Her inbox filled with organizations begging for help, realizing their brochures, websites, and appointment systems were built for eyes that heard too much and hearts that cared too little. She worked long hours, but they were her hours, her choices, her voice. And every evening when she returned to Grant's home, or he came to hers, the air felt lighter, warmer. They had built a rhythm, a slow, growing one. Dinner conversations were a dance of voice and hands. Ruby's stories filled the kitchen like bright paint splashes. Lena taught them signs. Grant taught her how to fold paper cranes the way his mother once did. Sometimes they watched documentaries, Ruby in the middle, the cat curled like a loaf on her legs. Lena would rest her head on Grant's shoulder, and he'd marvel at how something so simple could feel so profound. He felt whole in a way he hadn't in years, not because Lena completed him, but because she helped him remember the parts of himself he'd buried under grief. One evening, after Ruby went to bed, the house settled into a soft hum. Lena washed dishes at the sink, the warm water running over her hands. Grant dried each plate beside her shoulders, brushing occasionally. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't cinematic. It was domestic. Ordinary. Healing. Lena glanced at him, signing with her elbow, nudging his side. "You look tired." "Long day." He smirked. "Clients, meetings, a vending machine that declared war on me." She laughed, then asked, "Do you like being head therapist?" He paused, thinking. "I do," he answered softly, signing at the same time. Not because of the title, because it feels like I'm standing for the right things. Lena dried her hands and reached out, tracing the back of his hand with her finger. "You always were." The gesture sent a warmth through him he didn't try to hide. Weeks passed. Autumn deepened. Grant found himself lingering in moments longer than he used to, the way Lena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, when focusing the way Ruby leaned against Lena like she'd known her for years, the way the house felt less like a place and more like a heartbeat. One night, Ruby and Grant were cleaning up craft supplies after Ruby's attempt at making a papier-mâché volcano that had gone explosively wrong. Lena walked in from the kitchen, wiping cookie flour off her hands. Ruby looked at Grant with mischievous excitement. "Daddy." "Yes, Bug." Ruby leaned closer, lowering her voice dramatically. "Do you love her?" Grant blinked. "That's not how this works. I mean, love takes time." Ruby squinted. "So?" "Yes," Grant sputtered helplessly, and Lena bit back a smile. Later, when Ruby was asleep, Lena sat beside Grant on the old sofa, curling her legs under her. The lamp cast a warm glow across her face. "She's not wrong," Lena signed quietly, eyes searching his. Grant's pulse stumbled. About what? Love. Taking time. Her hands paused gently. "But we're not rushing. We're choosing." Grant breathed in slow and steady. "I am choosing this," he said aloud, signing along. "I am choosing you." Her breath hitched. Not fear, just recognition. "I'm choosing you too," she signed. And just like that, the simple truth settled between them, solid, unpretentious, real. A month later, Grant stood in the bathroom mirror fixing his collar for the 10th time. Ruby hovered behind him, bouncing on her toes with excitement leaking from her every pore. "Daddy," she whispered, "are you nervous?" Grant met her eyes in the mirror. "A little. Do you think she'll say yes?" Grant paused, touched by her confidence. "I hope so," he said, "but I want it to be her choice. Not because of me, not because of time, because she feels it." Ruby tugged on his sleeve urgently. "Show me again." He laughed and signed with her in front of the mirror. "Would you like to be in our family forever?" Ruby practiced it back, fumbling the hand shapes, then giggled. "I'll get it right, I promise." Grant kissed the top of her head. "Tonight," he whispered, "we ask her." He had reserved a table at Riverside Grill, the same place where everything had started, the same place where their worlds had collided under a quiet spell of hands and hope, the same place where he wanted to begin the rest of their lives. As he closed the jewelry box, the soft click echoed through the quiet house, and in that moment, one question pulsed louder than his heartbeat. Would Lena say yes? Or would the past still whisper too loudly for her to believe in forever? Riverside Grill glowed with the same warm hush it had on that first night, the soft clink of silverware, the muted hum of weekend conversations, the gentle rise and fall of laughter that lived like distant waves. But tonight, the air felt different, fuller, softer, like the whole room was holding its breath for something sacred. Grant stood outside for a moment, steadying himself. The ring box weighed warm in his jacket pocket, not heavy with fear, but with hope. Hope he'd never imagined himself allowed to feel again. He opened the door, and the familiar bell chimed overhead, a sound that had unknowingly marked the beginning of his second life. Inside, Lena and Ruby were already seated at the old corner table, the same one where a sting of betrayal once lingered, but where something beautiful had bloomed in its wake. Ruby's legs swung under the chair. Her cheeks glowed with a secret too big for her small body to contain. Lena looked up, eyes softening when she saw him. She signed, "You look nervous." He smiled, signing back. "Only a little." Ruby snorted loudly. Daddy almost dropped the ring in the toilet. Grant groaned. Ruby-Lena laughed, a quiet ripple that felt like home. She reached across the table and squeezed Ruby's hand. Grant sat down, feeling the moment gather like a tide pulling gently toward shore. Dinner passed in soft rhythms, spoon taps, napkin folds, Ruby's excited fidgeting, Lena's warm glances that lingered just a second longer than usual. They talked about Ruby's school project on volcanoes, about Lena's latest client, about nothing and everything. The waiter brought dessert, 3 small plates each with a chocolate truffle and a swirl of raspberry sauce. Grant felt his pulse quicken. It was time. He glanced at Ruby. She nodded, her whole body vibrating with responsibility. Grant signed, "Whenever you're ready, Bug." Ruby stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in her dress, then shuffled around the table to face Lena. She inhaled deeply, summoning courage the way children do with both innocence and all the bravery in the world. Her little hands rose, her eyes focused. She signed slowly but clearly, "Lena, can I ask you something important?" Lena froze softly, tenderly. Her lips parted. Ruby continued, voice trembling with emotion and pride. "Would you like to be in our family forever?" Her signs weren't perfect, her movements weren't smooth, but the meaning was unmistakable. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears pooled instantly, unhidden, unashamed. She bent down, cupping Ruby's face with trembling hands, unable to speak, unable to sign, unable to do anything but feel. When she finally looked up, Grant was already rising. He moved toward her, each step filled with quiet certainty. He knelt, not because tradition required it, but because reverence did. He opened the ring box, revealing a simple, elegant band that shimmered under the restaurant lights. His voice shook softer than the room, steadier than his heartbeat. "You walked into a trap that night," he said, signing each phrase with the same care he'd used to hold her heart. "But you became my rescue instead." Lena's tears spilled freely. "You showed Ruby that love speaks more than one language. You showed me I don't have to live half alive anymore. We're not incomplete without you." He paused, breath trembling. "But with you, we're more of ourselves than we've ever been." He inhaled deeply, hands signing the words his voice could barely carry. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, everything went still. The restaurant noise dimmed into a soft blur. The air tightened. Lena pressed her hands to her chest, shaking breath caught in a feeling too big for silence to contain. Then, with trembling fingers, she signed back, "Yes." Her voice broke, but carried through the room, "Yes." 1,000 times, "Yes." Applause erupted, not clapping but hands raised and waving in the deaf applause Lena had taught them. The entire restaurant swayed with movement, the kind of celebration that didn't need volume to be loud. From another table, the elderly couple who had once filmed the viral video recognized them. The old man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Looks like he passed every test that matters." She nodded, squeezing his hand. The wedding happened weeks later at the water's edge, a small ceremony of soft wind and gentle waves. The day felt wrapped in a kind of quiet grace. Nothing extravagant, nothing ostentatious, just love, bare and steady. Lena wore a simple ivory dress. Ruby held her hand the whole walk down the dock, signing little reminders Lena had taught her, deep breath. "You're beautiful. It's okay to cry." And Lena did. Grant waited under a wooden arch decorated with wildflowers Ruby insisted on picking herself. His hands trembled, but his smile was certain. The vows were spoken and signed. 2 languages braided together like threads of a single tapestry. Lena's parents wiped tears, pride and relief etched across their faces. Derek, Greg, and Tim stood in the back, not drawing attention, just silently cheering with raised, waving hands. When Grant and Lena kissed, Ruby squealed and hugged them both, shouting, "We're a real family now," and they were. But more importantly, they were a chosen family. Not created out of accident or obligation, but out of healing, out of courage, out of the belief that even in silence, love can be louder than hurt. As dusk settled and the reception faded into soft laughter and rustling dresses, Grant held Lena's hand, pulling her close. The wind brushed gently past them, carrying the scent of waterwood and the faint sweetness of cake. He whispered not because she needed volume, but because whispering made the moment feel like a secret carved just for them. They set me up as a joke. His thumb stroked her knuckles, but what they captured instead was proof that real kindness doesn't crack under pressure. Lena leaned her forehead against his. She signed, "It just shines brighter, especially in the quiet." And beneath the soft shimmer of soon-to-appear stars, they held on to each other whole, steady, and more themselves than ever before. And that is the end of our story tonight. But before you go, I want to leave you with something important. Sometimes in life we meet people who remind us that kindness is not weakness, that patience is not naivety, and that love doesn't need noise to be true. Grant and Lena's journey teaches us one powerful lesson. Real healing happens in the quiet moments when we choose to listen to learn and to see each other fully. Even when the world can be loud, confusing, or unkind, compassion still has the power to change everything. So I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment of unexpected kindness, or lived through a situation where someone's heart shone brighter than you expected? If you've experienced something similar, big or small, please share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. And, as always, I want to know, where are you watching from? Our little storytelling community stretches across countries and time zones, and every message reminds us how connected we truly are. If you enjoyed this story, and if you want more tales of healing hope and second chances, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you truly for spending your time here with me. Your presence, your stories, your support, they mean more than you know. Until next time, take care of your heart, and remember sometimes the quietest voices hold the strongest truths.